Federal Drive is presented by GEHA, Government Employees Health Association, proudly providing health and dental benefits to federal employees and their families. Visit GEHA.com.
You'd expect the Department of Veterans Affairs to lead on accessibility given the community it serves. But a recent report from the VA's Office of Inspector General found that just 4 out of 30 sampled IT systems met federal accessibility standards under Section 508. The findings raise serious questions, not just for the VA, but for every agency building digital tools for the public. Joining me with the details of what went wrong and how the department is working to get it right is Deputy Assistant Inspector General for Audits and Evaluations, Daniel Morris. Mr. Morris, thank you for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
This is a really interesting report, and we're going to dig into the details, but could you at the beginning just kind of describe the problem that you were investigating as you looked into this issue?
Sure. So this report's about Section 508, and that's intended to ensure individuals with disabilities have access to information in ways comparable folks without. So this all started kind of before this report really came out, in which we were looking at 508 compliance, focusing on VA's websites and current IT systems. But really what this report is about is how they go about procuring IT equipment and communication technologies. And we were really looking at the process involved in ensuring that VA was doing this before they actually obtained the systems.
And accessibility is especially important for the veteran community as you're dealing with folks that really have a variety of issues in terms of accessing IT applications, right?
Sure. Yeah, veterans and employees and everybody else.
So can you tell us a little bit then about how you looked into the issue, the process?
Yeah, again, this was a follow-on on a previous review and report we did. We heard concerns during that review that this wasn't happening. The 508 compliance office wasn't really involved in the procurement process. So we jumped right into a follow-on review of this. And so really to look at this, what we did was we took a sample of 30 systems that VA had acquired in recent years, and we really focused on what VA considered critical or bedrock systems in that. We obtained their evaluation reports, how the 508 compliance office evaluated whether they met the requirements or not. We reviewed market research documents, and then we interviewed individuals that procured the technology. And the focus of ours was, again, to see what steps they took during that procurement process that would ensure that they're acquiring the most 508 compliant products available at the outset. And so this is all based on requirements included in law, regulations, VA policies, and handbooks that really require accessibility to be considered and verified during the market research process before they obtain it.
Can you tell us a little bit more about the kinds of systems? Was this like Microsoft and SharePoint, or was this customer-facing tools? What kind of programs were you acquiring?
It could be any kind of information and communication technologies that VA uses. One example that we have in our report is a system in which that VA uses to train VA benefits staff to improve their claims processing. That was an example that we identified as having a critical defect because screen readers couldn't identify some text for users.
And were there particular functionalities that you wanted to make sure got included in this? You just mentioned screen readers as an example.
So what we did was rely on the Office of 508 Compliance and their documentation and their assessments and audits themselves of what they did to assess whether these vendors are complying with the requirements or not. And so our review and assessment was really to focus on the process and whether the contracting officers and the system owners and everybody was communicating to ensure that they really verified whether the vendors were going to provide a compliant product from the outset.
Did you find that you had to put in special requirements to make sure that 508 compliance was achieved, or were those sort of native to the applications that you were procuring?
So we didn't really go down that lane in this review. Again, we were focusing on what actions the VA staff took during market research and did they verify whether the vendors had the ability to comply as they should have. Many of the staff that we interviewed thought that simply including the provisions in the solicitation itself was sufficient to address that, but that wasn't really the case. What we found, simply having that language in the solicitation wasn't enough. Most of them failed the 508 compliance check after the fact, once the 508 office reviewed it after they had already obtained it. But at this point, VA has already obtained the system and the equipment, and now it's on the system owners to really get the issue fixed, which generally means they would have to go back to the vendor to fix what needs to be compliant.
I'm speaking with Daniel Morris. He's the Deputy Assistant Inspector General for the Office of Audit and Evaluations at the Veterans Administration. So let's dig a little bit more into your findings. You had some pretty significant ones, I think.
Right. As I was saying, we really focused on how there was a lack of involvement in the procurement process from the 508 office, and the contracting officers and system owners needed to get them involved. Where we saw that the 508 compliance was considered, it was only a reliance on statements that the vendors had in their documentation, but there wasn't a verification at that time. So 508 office, which is within OI&T of VA, they weren't being consulted on the documentation related to it. And the team found that while there was requirements in place to have this happen, it wasn't really clear on who was supposed to be doing what, and it wasn't clear on whether the contracting officers or other folks needed to do this ahead of time. So there's a lot of finger pointing in that case. Really, the consequences here are that VA's procuring systems that don't work for individuals with disabilities. I gave you that one example of the screen reader issue. But I think the bottom line here is with better communication, coordination, training, understanding of who's responsible for what, and VA could have reduced the risk of acquiring these inaccessible technologies at the outset.
And so what specific recommendations did you make for VA?
So we see some pretty achievable solutions here. We made 4 recommendations to VA, and this is on the responsibility of the CIO and also the Office of Acquisition and Logistics. So those 4 recommendations involve training for staff involved in the process, making clear those roles and responsibilities are in policy, also ensuring that future procurements are communicated with the 508 office first. And then finally, for the 508 office and the VA's Office of Acquisitions and Logistics to collaborate on procedures that they need to ensure compliance with the law. I think the solutions are straightforward, and it's really on leadership to champion the importance of this requirement.
And has the VA taken these suggestions on board?
So they've agreed. They're still working on implementing. The recommendations are still open. Some of the things that they're doing are the 508 office is going to coordinate their routine and recurring training offerings to ensure that acquisition staff are completing that training. They're going to outline and clarify the duties in their policy handbook, and then collaborate between the 508 office and the acquisition office to implement a process for staff to submit this market research when they should be doing it during the solicitation and procurement stages.
Well, as we mentioned up front, it's not just veterans who are VA's clients that have accessibility requirements. It's also people on your staff. But as we think more broadly, almost every federal agency comes up against this requirement. What lessons do you want them to take away from your report and your findings?
Yeah, you're right. I think this applies across the board, across government. What our main takeaway, I think, is that, VA acquires this type of technology and systems all the time. So it's really important that the contracting officers, the 508 office in our case, system owners, program managers really need to be on top of it to ensure compliance from the outset. And again, leaders should prioritize this and enforce these standards. We want to see that VA addresses this across the board. All of the administrations within VA are involved in this process. And without it, VA is going to experience issues with compliance. And if they continue to procure and then try to fix after the fact, they're going to continue to spend money trying to address those issues when they could have done it at the forefront.
Let's just pull that last thread a little bit longer. If we don't get these processes straight so that we buy the right kinds of tools with the right functionality at the beginning, what does it take to make these systems compliant on the back end?
Yeah, it's a lot of work on the system owners and the program offices to once they realize that the 508 office has deemed them incompatible or there's an issue with their accessibility, then they need to go back and work with the vendors to try to get that fixed, and that can often result in paying additional money.
And really important to get the 508 office involved on the front end, not just checking on the back end to see if you're compliant, but really building those requirements on the front end to make sure that you are compliant.
Absolutely.
I've been speaking with Daniel Morris. He's the Deputy Assistant Inspector General for the Office of Audits and Evaluations at the Veterans Administration. Mr. Morris, thank you so much for sharing this report with us today.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
We'll post this interview along with a link to the report at federalnewsnetwork.com/Federal Drive. Listen to the Federal Drive on your schedule. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.